on my screen?
Yeah, I don't see any okays on my screen, so.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. My name is John. I'm the hybrid program administrator for the East End Combination, and we're very happy to have our friend Russ Wilcox, and maybe you know of him because he's been here so many times. Today he's going to be talking about the artificial intelligence in everyday life, and we're going to he has a nice presentation which adds on to the previous one, and I'm putting together a dossier, if you will. This is good for you to know what Russ too, so we can have like a library of ones, because some people have asked, they've missed, and they want to see it, so.
Oh, awesome.
We're putting that together, but we're very
Cool.
with us. And without any further ado, we have some Zoomers, and we'll just let Russ go. So thank you very much. And I'll bring the sheets periodically when I get them. Copy right now.
Awesome. Well, good to see everyone again. I hope you are enjoying this nice summer day. Don't believe we're already in August. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of a sidetrack.
Right.
Is that on your side? Can you hear me?
Here, let me try this. One moment.
Test 1, 2.
Yeah.
Test. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2.
Say something.
Something. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Muted? Not muted.
Okay.
Test 1, 2. Test. Test.
Yep, no, we hear you. I just have to get it louder. One moment.
Okay.
Okay. That's gonna be better. Now it's gonna be really. Okay, say something.
Test 1, 2. Test. Something.
Talk some, say something.
Something. 1, 2. Test.
Okay.
Test.
This one. Okay.
Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test.
Yep, say it. Count to 10.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay.
You don't need the laptops on the Zoom, but you might be doing some activities.
Okay, I can't get connected.
Yeah, no activities today. We'll be just talking, so don't worry too much about that. We're going to be taking a slight divergence to what we were previously doing to talk about something that's been very, very important in the recent days. And so, hi everyone. My name is Russ Wilcox. I'm excited to be back here for you today. Hard to believe we're already almost halfway through August. Pretty soon we'll be getting down to the cooler weather. But before we dive in today, I want you to think about something. I want to think about how you got here today, what you drove, how you interacted, every device you used this morning, whether it's your phone alarm, your coffee maker, your car. They all have these ambiguous things called chips in them. And chips are an ambiguous term that is probably thrown around quite a bit. And today our goal is to not only uncover what these chips are, but why they've become the center of this global power struggle that affects everything from your smartphone prices to America's national security. And in addition to this, you guys are going to get a little bit of insider knowledge that I actually got to brief some folks on my findings in Washington, D.C. a few weeks back. And I'm going to share with you something that even the most expert of experts miss, a hidden vulnerability in the supply chain that China is quietly exploiting while Congress conveniently looks the other way. And so before we get to that, what we want to do is we want to talk about what is a chip and what is a semiconductor. And so let me go here. And what we'll cover today are these series of topics. So what chips are and where you can find them, how do chips work, the magic of transistors and semiconductors and the different quality of chips, AI special chips from CPUs to GPUs to TPUs, all of which are used to power AI we see today. The global supply chain and why it's not as simple as slapping a tariff on one thing. And we'll get to understand who makes what in this kind of intricate maze that we actually saw a lot of impact from in 2020 and 2021 during COVID. Once we have that kind of under our belt, what we'll do is we'll start going into deeper dives of current controversies, trades and tariffs, why we're in this mess, and what we're looking forward to in the future. So, what are semiconductors? We can start with the basics. So the name semiconductor pretty much tells you everything you need to know about it. Semi meaning partial, conductor meaning that it has something to do with conducting electricity. And so the way that you can kind of think about what a semiconductor is a controllable switch. So think of your kitchen faucet. You can turn it on, turn it off, there's no water, and turn it on, and there is water. But you are the one who is controlling all of the flow in between. It's not constantly on, it's not constantly off. And that's what semiconductors do with electricity. Now, this is very important because let's take this concept of the kitchen faucet and imagine having over 15 billion of these little tiny faucets just on this thing. 15 billion of them, all turning on and off millions and billions times per second in perfect coordination in order to accomplish a task. Whether they're on, we'll call it 1, and whether they're off, we'll call it 0. And these different patterns of 1 and 0s eventually become your photos, your texts, and everything digital. You might have heard this as a concept called binary, right? Binary meaning 2, and then on and off switches. And all of these transistors and semiconductors work in conjunction within the physical chip itself to make the magic happen that we are so accustomed to today. And the physical chip is very, very interesting because it is incredibly small, smaller than your fingernail, but it contains more components than there are stars in our galaxy. Chips are fundamentally one of humanity's most complex creations, and we depend on them for every single aspect of our daily life. So let's bring this back to something concrete. Your smartphone has about 15 different chips. One for the display, one for the Wi-Fi, one for cellular, the main processor, memory chips, power management, etc., etc. So each of the components of your phone are controlled by these different chips that work in coordination. Now, your car, unless you're driving something probably before 1990, has about 1,000 to 3,000 chips. They control everything from your engine turning on to your backup camera to unlocking your car. And one of the reasons why we saw such an increase of car prices during the COVID crisis was because there was a chip shortage. It's not that they couldn't make the cars themselves, but car companies had to ship vehicles without heated seats and other features because they couldn't get access to the chips because the supply chain was so fragile. And now if you think about it, we can't escape this. Even your refrigerator has chips now, controlling the temperature, managing the ice maker, telling it whether to go on and off if you put the glass to have water turn out, and running the display panel. And the key is, we are not escaping these. We have different qualities of chips. We can manufacture some here in the US, but others aren't beneficial for us to manufacture here in the US. And the story is we should be concerned that every single one of these chips goes through some sort of complex global journey before it reaches you. And it's not just a back and forth saying, okay, let's buy chips from Taiwan or China and get them here to the US. There is an entire global network of shipping that brings the components back and forth and back and forth before you even get your chip into that car. So what we want to take a look at first is understanding what these chips are. And as I show you, China now controls a critical step that no one is talking about. So, but before we get to the really interesting geopolitical stuff, we have to sit down and just try to conceptualize what a chip is. Now, a chip contains billions of transistors, and it's these tiny little electrical switches. Now, you are probably the generation that knows what a transistor radio is. You probably built them, you probably played around with them when you were younger. Imagine scaling that into billions and billions of components on something that is smaller than your fingernail. So these tiny transistors are electrical switches that is about 3 nanometers wide. Now, nano, meaning very, very, very tiny, is an abstract concept. To give you context, a human hair is 75,000 nanometers in length or width. And you could fit about 25,000 transistors on the width of one hair. That's how tiny these things are. And these are all working in coordination in very complex processes to make our lives much easier today. So if we bring this down to something a little bit more ooey and ahhy, your smartphone has more transistors than there are seconds that have passed since the Big Bang. Let that sink in, right? The Big Bang was about 14.6 billion years ago. So take the number of seconds in an hour, so 60 seconds in an hour, 3,600 seconds in a 3,600 seconds in an hour, and think about the number of hours since the Big Bang, right? That's a massive number. And there are more transistors in your smartphone than seconds since that first big pop. Now, I want you to highlight that because making these chips is very, very complicated. More so than treating someone with cancer or an immunocompromised individual, because these transistors have to work in coordination such that they switch on and off billions of times a second. But these transistors, are just one component. There's something a little bit more fascinating and a little bit more terrifying. Making these transistors work is only half the battle. They need to be connected, they need to be packaged, they need to be cooled, and that's called packaging. Just like how you package meat, we have to package and connect these chips. And this is where our story will take a little bit of a darker turn. So, making chips is almost like baking a 1,000-layer cake. This manufacturing process is one of the most complex processes humans have ever created. And it starts with sand. Just good old beach sand. Well, sand is made up of an element called silicon. So we take that beach sand And then we refine it and we refine it and refine it into the purest silicon in Earth. Once that's been refined, what we do is we slice it into wafers that are thin as paper, but flatter than anything you see in nature. Remember, a human hair is 75,000 nanometers in width. We're getting down to 2 nanometers, 7 nanometers, 14 nanometers. So this is an incredibly sophisticated and complex process. But once we do that, once we get this pure silicon, we do something that's called photolithography. Photo meaning light, lithography meaning printing. This process is where we start to have magic happen. We shine light, ultraviolet light through different masks to create different patterns, millions of times smaller than anything visible. And what it's doing is that this light is creating shadows to paint, but at the atomic level, getting down to the atoms that make up the silica. So what you're doing is you're creating these different images, these different shadow patterns that interact at the atomic level, generated just by good old ultraviolet light. Now, this is where the process gets very, very, very sophisticated. When we're making these chips, they cannot have any inconsistencies, not a speck of dust, not a sneeze, much like going into quarantine in a hospital. We call those clean rooms, right? I'm sure you've heard that concept, especially during the COVID crisis. There'd be a clean room where it would be isolated. You'd have these doctors go into with their PPE, right, to treat that individual to make sure that nothing got out, right? The same thing happens when we treat patients in Africa with Ebola and these highly contagious viruses, right? We have this clean room that acts as an isolation chamber. Well, these clean rooms where we make chips are about 10,000 times cleaner than a hospital operating room. Remember the scale that we're looking at, right? A nanometer. A single speck of dust would be the equivalent of dropping a 1-ton boulder on a circuit board. Just a speck of dust. This is just the intricacy that we have to think about. So what happens is that if I'm working on a chip and trying to build and design this and manufacture this, not only do I have to have lots of contingencies, lots of clean areas to protect this, right, in contingency plans if something goes wrong, but workers themselves have to wear full bunny suits, much like you would see someone going into a nuclear chamber or something like that, where there is not a single inch of skin exposed. And this process takes about 3 to 4 months and over 1,000 steps, where we layer on different layers of these silicon wafers with these different patterns, each thinner than a virus. But what happens when the chip comes out, it's just a tiny square of silicon. Useless. Like having a brain with no skulls, no nerves, no blood vessels. It's just the kind of skeleton. And that's where packaging comes in. How you get these chips to talk to each other, how you get them to connect, how you get them to go on and off. And all of that is so sophisticated, so not fun to talk about, so important, and unfortunately, that's where America is losing. But before we get to that, let's talk a little about more how we got here and something called Moore's Law. Now, Moore's Law is something you might have heard of in the media. It's this physical, empirical law that in 1965, a guy named Gordon Moore predicted And he predicted that we double the number of transistors on every chip every 2 years. And when he proposed this, people thought he was insane. It was impossible, but it's held true over 60 years. So think about how much has changed from 1990 to 2000. I remember being a kid and having technology called a cassette player. I remember being 3 or 4 and loving my little cassette player, right? Well, when I was 8 or 9, that changed to a CD. When I was 10, my mom got me my first iPod. That was in 2001. Now think about the jump in technology we've made from 2001 to now. Your smartphone is literally millions of times more powerful than the computer that guided Apollo 11 to the moon. And it uses less power than a light bulb. Now, Moore's law is actually slowing down. We're hitting the point where we're starting to break physics. And not break physics, but physics is breaking us. We're hitting this limit where transistors are now just a few atoms wide. And you can't get much smaller than an atom for lots of very interesting physics reasons. And so the industry is pushing towards new solutions, like how do you 3D stack these chips? And how do you make this packaging more efficient? Again, this word packaging keeps on popping up and up and up and up. At the end of the day, it's connecting these things. It's making the interactions happen. And who's leading in this advanced packaging technology? Not America, not Europe. You might think Taiwan, but no. Taiwan does the nice, cool silica stuff. It's China. So all of the tariffs we are putting on sending chips are useless because they're innovating not on the construction of the chip itself, but how this packaging happens, which are exempt from the CHIPS Act, from the National Defense Reauthorization Act, from all of the tariffs. Insane. Now, why this is important is because chips are not treated equally. The chip that's in my refrigerator over there is a much lower quality chip than the chip that's driving my AI data centers. So there's a quality side of this argument as well. And that goes into, guess again, the packaging. How do we get this stuff together? So what do these different chips look like and what do they do? So I'm not going to talk about the chips that are in your car or the chips that are in your refrigerator. I'm going to talk about the main chips you have to be concerned about that are in the news that everyone's talking about, which are the chips that are in your computers. Because AI is run on a computer, a big old data center someplace, probably in Texas or central China if you're in Asia. And these computers, these data centers, these phones, these electronic devices that you're interacting with right now have different chips for different jobs. And so one of the things that we've talked about over the last couple months is AI. Now, AI has gotten to become so powerful, not only due to the algorithmic advances, but due to the actual manufacturing advances. In fact, the same models that we use today in AI were first described in the late 1980s. The pivotal textbooks that I read to learn AI were written in 1998, 1993, and 1989. The theory was there, but the technology was not. And that's what's changed. And it's important to recognize that modern AI is much different from regular computing. Essentially, your laptop has what's called a CPU, a central processing unit. You might have heard the company Intel. That was a big one that made these CPUs. And you can think of this as a general manager. It controls what tasks your computers are doing one step at a time. And it's great for general computing, like one brilliant chef preparing a meal. But what happens is sometimes you need something a little bit more sophisticated. Now remember what I said about these transistors. These transistors essentially are functioning as ones and zeros, ons and offs. Now also remember that when we first started this journey, I told you that all AI does is it takes these representations, it encodes them into long lists of numbers that we have to do math with. So what happened was we would need more dedicated chips for the mathematical modeling to make graphics cards better. So if you have grandchildren or you played video games yourselves, you could probably think about what gaming was like in the 1990s. I remember being 8 years old and playing Frogger with my grandmother. And I remember when Frogger first came out and you jump around and everything would think that was so cool. But the graphics were pixelated, it was 2D, and not really physical representative. Well, what happened is the math to make it go from 2D to 3D was so sophisticated and so much computation needed within these calculations that you needed to create a dedicated chip that we call a GPU, a graphics processing unit. And what happens is that this is a dedicated chip where there are thousands of these simple processors working together, dedicated to math. And so what happens is that this is like an army of chefs preparing one ingredient for an army. And it's dedicated to those specific sets of computations that were originally designed for making better graphics. Well, as the models got more sophisticated, what we would do is we'd say, let's siphon off some of that compute from the graphics card to actually have dedicated advanced math done that allowed us to make these really sophisticated models. And so that's one of the reasons if you bought stock in NVIDIA in 2019, you've probably gone up about 1,000% or 1,000 times what your initial investment was, because these GPUs have been hacked in a way to be utilized just for compute. And we're getting to the point now where we're not even being able to do the calculations on these GPUs, where we are having more sophisticated, dedicated chips because all of the data we have in, all of the models are so sophisticated that we actually have what's called a TPU, a tensor processing unit. And these TPUs are like GPUs, but on steroids. You can think of it as the AI specialist. Now, right now, these are custom to Google. They are extremely efficient for AI tasks, and they build a robot specific for one job. And at the end of the day, what happens is that AI is different from regular computing. Your laptop CPUs process one thing at a time, but AI needs to do millions and billions of these calculations simultaneously. And that's why these GPUs, which were originally designed for games, were built and used. But here's the catch. These chips generate massive amounts of heat. And if you take a look, and it's kind of interesting, if you see any of those professional gamers that you see in kind of Korea or Japan and you see them playing online, what you'll see is that you'll see often a computer case that has a cooler on it because it's running so many computations, it's heating up. And as we talk about data centers and water, that water is used to cool these chips because these AI chips generate enormous amounts of heat and need ultra fast connections. And the only way to achieve this is through these advanced 2.5 dimensional and 3D packaging techniques. Again, like stacking these chips on top of each other with thousands of these microscopic connections that make it run. So without these sophisticated packaging techniques, even a $40,000 NVIDIA AI chip is just an expensive piece of silicon that would sit on my table over there. It's the packaging that allows this to come together. And guess where 98% of that packaging happens? In China. So you can start to see a narrative here, right? So you have a very complex process that's very easy to talk about the concept of a chip. A chip is, a piece of silicon that's visible that people can think about, right? But it's an incredibly sophisticated process that requires lots of techniques that really requires sophisticated policy to understand. And that's where we're running into this challenge. And that's why this current chip market is going to be one of the most important aspects of the next 10 years. Because right now, NVIDIA is dominating this. NVIDIA, which is the graphics card company I was telling you about, they have about 80% of the chip market. And these can go from anywhere from a kind of not great graphics card on your laptop to something that a gamer would use that maybe would be $5,000, all the way up to what are called the H100 chips that go from anywhere between $25,000 and $40,000 each. And these are in so demand that their latest generation of chip for 2025 that has not been released yet is already sold out. And that is the key. So instead of just dominating, what happens is you have competition heating up. You have AMD coming into the space. You have Google. And Intel is struggling to catch up. But what's happening here is we're just on a waiting list, more or less. So let's say if I wanted to have their H100 chip for 40 grand, I can call up NVIDIA and I can get one. But there's a 2-year waiting list already. And that's not taking into account any of the supply chain disruptions that we're starting to see today. So what's happening is companies are starting to hoard them like gold. But what happens is this complex dynamical system of manufacturing. This is the point that NVIDIA does not advertise. After their chips, which are made in Taiwan, many of these chips go to China for advanced packaging. The most sophisticated AI chip in the world, the ones that we actually have tariffs on and bans on, still have to be shipped to China because the most sophisticated AI chip in the world depends on these Chinese packaging factories to actually work. So think about this. Oops. Think about this. Every ChatGPT query, every AI generated images we've done, every decision your car makes, they all depend on chips that require Chinese factoring packaging to function. And at the end of the day, what we've done is we started the AI revolution here in the United States. And what we've done is we've handed them a choke point over the entire AI revolution on a golden platter. Because it does not matter how many chip manufacturing facilities we spin up here in the United States, we do not have the packaging, and no one in the federal government is talking about that, which is why I happened to be invited to several Senate offices last month to discuss this pressing issue. So this is the concept of a chip. This is what goes into it. This is how it's used. This is how it's built. This is where we've been. This is where we're going. Now what we want to do is we want to talk about what is this ambiguous supply chain that I mentioned. Well, let's take a look at the journey of a chip. So the chip design starts in Apple, for example. In nice sunny Vale, California, and that design gets shipped off to a company in Taiwan, the TSMC. TSMC manufactures it in Taiwan. But then it goes to China, or now other parts of Southeast Asia, for packaging and testing. And only then does it go into your phone. So you design here, you manufacture there, you package there, you assemble there, you go back to here, and you cross the ocean multiples of times where anything can disrupt this supply chain. A hurricane, tariffs, a conflict, COVID. Any disruption anywhere breaks this entire process, a process that we depend on for modern life. So let's talk about numbers here. Taiwan makes about 92% of the advanced chips. And we know that's a problem. But China controls 98% of the packaging. And no one is talking about this. How did I find out? Well, remember that blog I told you about that I started a few months ago for fun? Apparently, I can't do anything for fun. Because what I discovered there, inside these Chinese documents that no one reads, that have not gone all the way up through the CCP, which are unbiased reports, everything points to 98% of packaging. And so what we're doing here in the United States is we're obsessing over who bakes the cake while ignoring who puts it in the box. Without putting the cake in the box, you can't deliver the cake. And without this packaging process, the chips do not work. And so what happens is we have this really messy situation that is very complicated, that's very hard to understand. And it brings us to a focal point, which is a little island 50 miles off the coast of mainland China called Taiwan. The world's chip factory. Now, this won't be a lecture on how did Taiwan make the great decisions and investments that it did starting in the 70s. It was not luck. It was opportunity that they just capitalized on. But what we have here is a very remarkable situation, which is this little island. This island is smaller than West Virginia that produces 92% of the world's advanced chips, right? I'm talking about the chips that are going in front of in the computers in your cars, not in your refrigerators. And so what they did was they succeeded through decades of focused investment, incredible work ethic, brilliant business models, innovations, and they set up a manufacturing process for everyone, but competes with no one. And what happened was this process, Taiwan actually called the Silicon Shield. Because if you take a look at the geopolitics of Taiwan, you have the Red Revolution of the communists in the late 30s and 40s, and you had the Han Dynasty. You had these anti-communists that fled China to an island 50 miles off the coast, and they needed to be protected. And so part of this protection came into this theory of the Silicon Shield, where the world needs their chips so badly that everyone would defend them and no one would attack them. But that was false. Because in the 90s, we started, well, I don't want to say started, but we greatly increased moving manufacturing here from the United States to overseas. And this is where it's really concerning. Even Taiwan depends on China for this packaging. They just make the chips. They are not doing the packaging. Sichuan province in China alone is building 9 more packaging facilities this year, and not one is covered by sanctions. Not one is covered by tariffs. Why? Because it's not easily understandable. So at the end of the day, what happens is while Congress writes these restrictions, China is just writing checks. They're acting as the central hub of technology. And that's not by coincidence. This goes into what I call their Digital Silk Road Initiative that we'll be talking about next time. But for now, to get to that point, we still have to understand more about these chips. So I'm going to bring you back to what seemed like a lifetime ago, which was 2020. I remember flying out from Boston, Massachusetts, to San Francisco to meet a customer, and I get off the flight and I land and I look at my phone, and I kid you not, I had 147 missed calls and text messages. When you get that message, you ask who died. I got the last flight out of Boston before Governor Baker shut it down. And my hotel was conveniently put next to the big cruise ship that was an evictor. Now, I got the last flight back. But remember in 2021, when car prices went crazy. Now, I'm sure all of you know that when you drive a car off the lot, the thing becomes to depreciate instantly. But remember how much used cars were going for? Because they had the chips in them that had the heated seats and all of the components that we couldn't get. And so these dealers were actually selling used cars for more than new ones because of this technology. So what happened? Other than this being a crazy black swan event, COVID hit. And COVID hit car companies hard, and they panicked and canceled their chip orders. Then everyone started working from home and bought new electronics. So suddenly, chip demand had exploded while the supply chains collapsed. So how many of you had to wait months for a new car? Or couldn't find the electronics or the PlayStation your grandkids wanted for Christmas? Chips. Chips. So what we learned, that modern life completely depends on chips. No chips, no cars. No chips, no phones. No chips, no computers. No chips, no modern economy. The shortage is mostly over now, but another one is going to come. Why? Because we have not fixed this fundamental problem. We are still focused on Taiwan. And who wants Taiwan back? Xi Jinping. So, this mess of a supply chain actually created a new Cold War that we are in. Because we are so entangled in this mess with this central node focusing on Asia, we have new geopolitical tensions. So I'm not going to mince words. This is scary, but it's important that we understand. Just like how we understood what was going on in the 60s and 70s and 80s with the threat from the Soviet Union and the Cold War, what's happening now is the exact same thing, but it's not with nuclear weapons. We're in a technology Cold War with China. And so in 2022, America banned the selling of advanced AI chips to China. We restricted the equipment needed to make these advanced chips, and we said, no, we're going to start trying to build them here. And that's what was called the CHIPS Act. China didn't like that. So again, how are these chips made? By sand and other rare earth metals that we say, it's a little too nasty for us to build here in the United States. We'll just import these raw materials. Well, guess who we import from? China. So China responded by banning rare earth exports and investing heavily in domestic production. And in fact, during this time, since 2022, they achieved a breakthrough. Huawei, which is a large tech company, they have a new phone that has a new 7-nanometer chip made entirely in China. Every single piece. Something that we thought was impossible under our sanctions. But here, we have to step back and say, let's take ourselves out of this American viewpoint to understand the system. What China did was brilliant. They played a long game. While we focused on blocking this chip manufacturing, they doubled down on this domestic packaging. They said, we're not going to match your restrictions. We're not going to do tit for tat. We're going to do something a little bit more insidious. We are going to make the United States depend on China for something that we didn't even realize was strategic. And so those 9 packaging facilities in Sichuan, they're building the infrastructure to control how every chip, American, Taiwanese, European, becomes usable. Again, I know I keep on saying this, but it's not the chips themselves that matter. It's the packaging, it's the layering, it's how these interact for the compute. China just played economic jujitsu with the United States. So, what does this mean? So, current tariffs on China are about 50% historically. When I first wrote this talk, under the Trump administration, I believe they went up to about 100%. So here's how a tariff works. This is not going to be a lecture on politics or tariffs. Americans do pay the burden of tariffs. But to understand this, we have to understand how this process works. So Dell imports a laptop from China. Dell pays the tariff. Not China, but it's a tax. Well, Dell says, that hurts my profit margins. I don't want to eat that. So I'm going to pass that cost to Best Buy. Well, Best Buy says, I don't want that. and they gets passed to you, the consumer. And so that $1,000 laptop a year ago is now $1,500. So your next iPhone could cost anywhere between $200 and $600 more. Gaming consoles will double in price. And here's the kicker. Remember the goal of tariffs. The goal of tariffs is to try to promote American manufacturing. There's arguments around this about American special interests and national security. But the thing is, if we make the chips here, guess where we have to send them to? China, because we're not building these packaging facilities at all. So tariffs won't even reduce our dependence on chips. So it's like putting a tax on coffee beans while you still need to use someone else's coffee maker. You pay more, yet you're still dependent. So how did we get here? We got here because America valued efficiency over independence. In the 1980s and 90s, American companies discovered that they could design chips here but manufacture them much cheaper in Asia. Stock prices went up and everyone was happy. And building a chip factory costs a lot of money. Anywhere between $20 and $40 billion. So to put that into perspective, that is more than the entirety of NASA's annual budget. And only a few companies can afford it. And you need to scale more and more and more to make money. You have to run 24/7, producing millions of chips. So you have the cost not only to construct these things, but you have the time delays having to be put up with local communities and the pushback and the regulatory side. And it's a mess. And we made a fatal error. We thought that manufacturing was just about costs. But now it's about capability. While we designed better chips, Asia learned to make them, and now they make the chips we can't. So not only is China making the chips we can't, making us dependent on them, they have a more forward-thinking societal interpretation of artificial intelligence where everything is in a central ecosystem. And if I had to bet, the first instances of AGI, which is artificial generalized intelligence, will not come from the United States. It'll come from China. And no one wants that. And why? Because of this. Packaging seemed like simple assembly work, but it wasn't. Now China's advanced packaging material is essential for artificial intelligence, and we just cannot replicate it. We cannot replicate it. We optimized for efficiency, and what we did was we created a massive strategic vulnerability. So we tried to fix that vulnerability by putting a bet on semiconductors. 2022, Congress finally woke up. They passed the CHIPS Act, which, again, I'm not going to get into politics. You can read about the political jujitsu going on Capitol Hill right now with the CHIPS Act. But at the end of the day, the CHIPS Act was set to provide $52 billion to build chip factories in America. And it triggered over $450 billion in a private investment, so much so that even TSMC is building in Arizona, Intel in Ohio, Samsung in Texas. So that's the good news. We're starting to wake up a little bit. And so by 2030, America could almost triple its chip production and bring manufacturing back here to the United States. But I guess you've heard me say this enough. That's not going to do it because we are investing in the manufacturing and not the packaging. So it's like building a car factory when you don't have a highway. What good is making something that you have to ship across the ocean, ship back, probably have a tariff on it, that you cannot make functional here in the United States? What we're doing is we're building higher and higher walls around an empty fortress while China builds the city outside. And we're not alone. Everyone is building chips. Europe is racing to do this, South Korea. Europe is spending over 43 billion euros, while Japan is partnering with TSMC, and South Korea plans to spend over 470 billion by 2047. Again, think about these years. Where do they line up? China has a 2030 initiative. They have a 2035 initiative. We have Taiwan. We have political instability. We have collapsing systems. Meanwhile, everyone is in this race for chips. But again, this is where we have to take ourselves out of the system and look at what China's doing differently. They're building. Right outside my apartment is the commuter rail. It takes me about 15 minutes to get to Boston, which is 5 miles away. China has high-speed rails. They are focusing on infrastructure, and they're doubling down on it. While everyone builds these fabs out, these fabrication facilities, fabs for short, they're building these packaging facilities, connected by high-speed railways, coordinated by one provisional government that moves faster than any of federal agencies, because that's what authoritarianism has over democracy, is efficiency. And so at the end of the day, they're not trying to compete with TSMC in manufacturing or with America in design. They're saying the manufacturing is good enough, the design is good enough, we're going to double down, and we're going to control the step that everyone forgot, which is infrastructure. And so they even have a timeline for this. Guess where that timeline ends? 2030. So enough of the doomerism. What's next? So we have some very interesting advances coming down this trip. We have 2 nanometer chips, so these are even smaller and more powerful. You have dedicated chip designs. And what's more important is, and I've said this before, we are not going to get to AGI without radically changing our algorithmic models. And that's going to require a push in technology. And so there's new technologies coming up, which is quantum computing. And guess who's leading in that? China. Neuromorphic chips, so that mimic the human brain. Optical computing, so that uses light instead of electricity. Guess who's leading in that? China. And carbon nanotubes, which are taking these transistors and making them molecular scale. And guess who's leading in that? China. It's going to be an interesting few years. But what does that mean for us? For us, it means that over the next 2 years, there are going to be rises in electronic prices. You'll probably have better availability and more AI capabilities in more devices. And that hedges on a certain assumption, the assumption being that we do not go to war over Taiwan. In the medium term, you'll have more stable supply, you might have more American-made options, and you'll have job opportunities. These jobs are highly, highly valuable, highly skilled. And these are going to be the new job opportunities that move up into tech. And these are the types of manufacturing jobs we want in the United States. And so what happens is that every day, smartphones are getting smarter, medical devices are getting more efficient, cars are being safer and more efficient, and home devices more intelligent. And I didn't want to intend to be alarmist or scare you, but we are living in a very, very interesting geopolitical time. And to understand that, we have to have education. We have to have education in artificial intelligence. We have to have education in chips. We have to really understand that we no longer live in an industrial world. We live in a world where China is leading in implementation, in education, in integration. And the only thing that will save us is American innovation. And that's dependent on education across all of our populace, which is why I love to be here with you today. So the key takeaways that we want to go away from this lecture are: chips are everywhere. thousands in your car alone. These transistors are tiny switches that work in harmony with billions and billions of calculations, and chips are really hard. And it's not just the chips, it's the packaging. The challenge is Taiwan makes about 92% of advanced chips. China controls about 98% of the packaging. Supply chains are fragile. And then, of course, there is this geopolitical matter that we all can observe when we turn on the news, whatever news you want to watch. So, what are the solutions? I recommended $500 billion spent in the United States just on infrastructure. We have new fabs coming with US production tripling by 2030. And I am begging people to take a look at this packaging. And then, of course, we have new technology coming up. We have AI, we have quantum, we have technologies that we have not even thought of yet that are going to be reliant on these new high-performance chips. So at the end of the day, a chip is more than that little square piece that we think of, but represents one of the greatest geopolitical risks of our generation. And now you know something about that. And so on that note, I will open this up to some questions. We can go a little bit over today because I know I talked a lot, but I hope you found this very informative. And next week will be a comparison of what is China doing with the United States, and then we'll get back to some of the very interesting LLM and computer vision stuff. So on that note, thanks for having me, and I will take questions.
What chip company should we invest in?
That's a really good question. I am not an investment professional, but I'm still bullish on NVIDIA. So NVIDIA, AMD is another one, and then take a look at some of the new startups coming out as well.
NVIDIA.
NVIDIA and AMD.
I didn't hear you.
NVIDIA and AMD are the two big ones.
MRD?
AMD.
AMD.
When
Yes.
When we learn to use our AI more, I thought we were going to get together and use our iPads and use
Yes.
AI.
What we're going to do is we're going to do that next month. Sorry. I wanted to cover this because there has been so much information on chips. So next month I will be there in person for those sessions, and then we'll do the one on the China the next month. Sorry, I inverted those two. So next month, bring your iPad. We'll do some work on learning this. But given all of the discussion points going around, I wanted to take this time for this session to make sure that we were informed and we actually knew what was going, so we could understand all of the conversations going on in today's news cycles.
I have another question, if that's okay. Does China need anything from the United States?
They need our debt, right? That's one of the other calculations that go into it. They are one of the primary holders of American debt, but that is on their roadmap, is to be kind of the central technology power. Now, I talked about that in terms of imports and exports. If you take a look at Chinese culture, it's very interesting. They have a different viewpoint on education. They are phenomenal engineers, but they don't encourage critical thinking within their education paradigms. And so what happens is that we will have innovation here in the United States. What will happen is that innovation will then go over to China somehow, and then they'll reverse engineer it and outperform us. So if we take a look at what our best capital is to double down on innovation, double down on infrastructure, and hope that that will be enough. Yes.
It's not a cheery picture. And I didn't expect it would be. I appreciate your going through this. Because you really explained what we should be aware of, but at the same time, I feel very helpless.
So don't feel helpless. The first thing to do around this is how you encounter helplessness is to be able to actually understand the actual problems we're dealing with. Now, what I said here was just again to showcase what we're doing. There are some great folks doing some awesome work in this space. Now, one of the arguments why there won't be a conflict with Taiwan is that China is still dependent on these chips. No one wants to see Taiwan turn to glass for that. And so if you take a look at it, what's happening is that there is going to be an increase in American production of chips. That's the goal. That's what you see with some of the new initiatives coming out like Project Stargate. And so we are in a very turmoil and a bunch of turmoil right now for a number of reasons. And my argument is to best understand that and best empower the people to solve that is to be educated and be able to talk about this information, be able to counter disinformation, and really have that viewpoint. So yes, while there are challenges coming up, I still believe in our ability to come together to solve problems. Look at what we did in the 1950s with the moon, with the infrastructure projects like the highway, right? Americans do come together, and there is an opportunity for us to come together. And in fact, some of the things that I'm studying and writing on is one of the theories that are going around to kind of bring us back together against this tribalism that we're encountering in the United States is some sort of advancement in AI from China that will wake us up and say, hey, we need to actually start working together again. And so that is the viewpoint that I take, rather than saying, oh my God, things are not going to be great, to recognize what are the small things that I can start to do, and what are the small things that I can do to start preparing myself. And so what most likely is going to happen is that it's just going to be increases in prices for the next couple of years until manufacturing gets popped up. And we'll have some geopolitical tensions, but we wanted to just showcase how complex this system is. Yes, in the back in the blue shirt.
Hi, so what are the reasons why the US won't get into packaging?
That's a good question, and I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm trying to dive into that a little bit more. One, it's probably a little bit nastier environmentally, and it has to do with the regulations. We know the regulation processes in trying to build a power plant is hard. But that is a question that I have to figure out a little bit more and go deeper into that. Yes, I have two questions in the blue shirt from one in the front first. Yes.
Well, is there any stomach amongst all the companies to create packaging gear? And I know they're looking at the chips, but it seems the packaging is a crucial portion to help control our security for.
100%. And that's where I've been talking with folks. I believe that there are some initiatives coming up. This is something that just needed to have more awareness, especially from the appropriation side. There are private companies that are innovating on the packaging side as well. What we need is on the federal side and on the infrastructure side, almost a Manhattan project scale investment for this, in my opinion. But there are also plenty of great opportunities in the private sector that are coming out as well. And it's just a matter of timing. And again, this is where the innovation is going to come from, right? Where if we were to invest in this type of manufacturing, America will lead the world again, because we have the greatest minds, we have the greatest institutions. Now, how do we bring this back in a way to modern manufacturing?
We have just time for one more question. Can I get something ready for 2:15? Oh, right there.
Yes, in the back.
Yeah, my question is, Apple has, said they're gonna invest over $500 billion, here in the United States. Does that address the packaging issue at all?
I'd have to take a look into what they're actually doing.
That's the problem, so, you
Yes.
know, investing all this money, you think that that's what they would be address it.
100%. The first thing is actually getting the chips here themselves is the first issue. That is kind of where all of the discussions I've been seeing are coming along. I will report back to you next time in person and tell you what I find out about Apple's plan. So on that note, it was another great week to see you guys again, and I cannot wait to see you in person for a lovely day in September in Eastham.
Thank you.
Thank you.